When you think of the Boer War, what comes to mind? Probably pith helmets, maybe khaki uniforms, a dusty, distant colonial conflict, right? Well, the story we've all been told, the one that's in the textbooks, is missing a huge piece of the puzzle. So let's uncover the hidden history of this incredibly complex war.
So, the standard story is pretty straightforward. You've got the mighty British Empire, hungry for more territory, and, more importantly, the world's richest goldfields. And on the other side, you've got two small, fiercely independent Boer republics who are not about to give up their land. Classic stuff. And this one phrase, this has basically defined our memory of the war for over 100 years. A white man's war. The idea was that this whole fight was only between these two white powers, battling it out for control of southern Africa. But was it really that simple? I mean, could a war that would literally define the future of an entire nation really only have two sides? It's time to peel back those layers, because what's been left out of the history books is pretty shocking. Okay, so let's start with the official players. You've got the British Empire, the biggest in the world at the time, and squaring off against them are the two Boer republics, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, which were founded by Dutch-descended Afrikaners who just wanted to be left alone.
Now, this conflict didn't just pop up overnight. Tensions had been simmering for decades. You had British expansion pushing up against this really stubborn Afrikaner nationalism, and then bam, 1886, gold. Massive gold deposits are found in the Transvaal, and everything changes. Thousands of British miners called outlanders flood in. The Boers get nervous, they'll be outnumbered, and deny them voting rights. Add in some bad blood from a previous war that the Boers actually won, and by 1899, the whole thing is a powder keg. It finally blows when the Boers tell Britain to get its troops out. Britain says no, and the war is on. If you were a betting person back then, this looked like a total mismatch. The largest empire on Earth versus basically a bunch of farmers. But the reality on the ground? Way, way more complicated. And the difference between the two armies is just wild. The British brought in almost 600,000 professional soldiers, using classic tactics, marching in formation. The Boers, outnumbered almost 8-1, were a citizen militia. These guys were master horsemen and incredible shots, armed with better German rifles. They fought a guerrilla war, hitting hard and then just vanishing into the landscape they knew like the back of their hand. And in the beginning, it worked. It worked amazingly well. But here, this is the exact point where the traditional story just completely falls apart. Because while the British and the Boers were fighting, there was a third, much, much larger group that wasn't just caught in the middle. They were active players whose role has been pretty much erased from history. Just take a look at this number, over 155,000. That's not a casualty figure. That is the estimated number of Black and brown South Africans who were directly involved in this war. That is more than double the entire Boer army. So yeah, this was never a two-sided war. The majority of the population in South Africa made up this huge, overlooked third front. And their part in all of this was absolutely crucial and really complex. I mean, the numbers are just staggering when you see them laid out. The vast majority, around 140,000 Black South Africans, served with the British. And a smaller group, about 15,000, were with the Boers. They were working as scouts, messengers, laborers, and as the war got more desperate, even as armed fighters. So why did they get involved? Well, the reasons were all over the map. For those who joined the British, a paid wage was a huge deal in a time of incredible poverty, and some genuinely hoped a British win would mean more freedom and an end to the Boers' oppressive policies. But for those on the Boer side, well, most of them had no choice at all. They were servants and farm workers, forced to serve their masters without pay as so-called agteriers, basically looking after horses and supplies. So as the Boers' hit-and-run tactics kept working, the British High Command, led by Lord Kitchener, got desperate. And they turned to a brutal, horrifying new strategy, one that would have a catastrophic human cost for civilians, both Black and white. They called it the Scorched Earth policy, and it was exactly what it sounds like. To cut off any and all support for the Boer fighters, British troops burned everything. Over 30,000 farms, gone. Crops, up in smoke. Livestock, killed. They left nothing but devastation, and it created a massive refugee crisis. So what happened to all these displaced people, both white Boers and Black Africans? They were rounded up and forced into what the British called refugee camps, but we know them today by their real name, concentration camps. More than 285,000 people, about 145,000 white and 140,000 Black, were locked away in them.
And the death toll was just unspeakable. Officially, 28,000 white civilians died in the camps, most of them women and children. For black civilians, the official count is over 23,000, but we know for a fact this is a massive undercount because the British barely kept any records for the black internees.
These pictures, they give us just a small window into the grim reality of these places. They were overcrowded, filthy, and disease was everywhere. But even within this shared misery, your race determined just how much you suffered. Look, conditions were awful for everybody, but they were systematically horrifically worse in the black camps. White internees at least got tents and some food rations. Black internees, often nothing, no shelter, practically no medical care. And get this, they had to pay for their own tiny rations by doing forced labor for the British Army. The black camps weren't just concentration camps, they were forced labor camps. This quote here, it comes from a complaint filed by black deportees in one of the camps. And you can just feel the crushing sense of betrayal. They were promised protection by the government, but instead they were forced to pay for their own imprisonment while watching Boer families, the supposed enemy, get food for free. The final price for all this is almost impossible to imagine. This haunting photo is of Lizzie Van Zyl, a young Boer girl who died of typhoid. The big killers were disease and starvation, and of course the most vulnerable suffered the most. A staggering 81% of all the recorded deaths in the black concentration camps were children. So in 1902, the war finally ends. Britain wins. But the peace that came next would completely betray the hopes of black South Africans and plant the seeds for a whole century of oppression and division. You can literally draw a straight line from the end of this war to the start of apartheid. The 1902 peace treaty was all about making the British and the Boers happy with each other. And how did they do that? By sacrificing the rights of the black population, explicitly deciding to just not talk about them having a vote. This directly led to the 1910 Union of South Africa, a new country built on the idea of white rule. And that in turn laid the groundwork for the formal legal system of apartheid that started in 1948. The legacy of this forgotten history is just profound. But now, thankfully, there's a growing movement in South Africa and around the world to create a much more complete memory of the war, to tell these forgotten stories, and to finally acknowledge the huge contributions and the terrible suffering of black South Africans as a central part of their country's history. At the end of the day, the story of the Boer War is a powerful reminder that history isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about who gets to tell the story. For South Africa, the process of healing is tied directly to the process of remembering fully and honestly. And it leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? How can a nation heal from a history that is, in many ways, still being written?